Good afternoon. It's Friday the 6th of September 2024, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. I'm your host, Mike Robinson. Joining me today, we have Mark Anderson from the United States and Debi Evans. Now, we're going to get kicked off with a consultation which is going on in Northern Ireland at the moment. This is entitled Public Policy Proposals to Inform the Development of a New Public Health Bill for Northern Ireland. The consultation opened on the 5th of July this year and it closes on the 27th of September. So thank you to the person who sent this through to us, asking for a little bit more coverage of it. So let's have a look at some of the text from the actual consultation document itself. Now, this is the second consultation on public health legislation. The first happened in 2015 before the so-called pandemic, of course. But they are taking sort of, they say they're taking sort of lessons learned from the pandemic to inform this consultation. And it says domestic regulations may be made for the purposes of preventing, protecting against, controlling or providing a public health response to the incidence or spread of infection or contamination in Northern Ireland, whether from risks originating there or elsewhere. Now, this is on page 47, it begins, of this document. There's a whole host of other material here which we're not going to get time to cover today. So I do suggest that anybody in Northern Ireland has a look at this. But it says the regulations may impose restrictions or requirements on or in relation to persons, things or premises in the event of or in response to a threat to public health, and in relation to a person. So we'll just look at what they say about persons. The regulations may impose a special restriction or requirement, such as requiring a person to submit to a medical examination. We'll go back there 1 second. To submit to an examination, be detained in a hospital or other suitable establishment, keep a person in isolation or quarantine, require a person to be vaccinated or to receive other prophylactic treatment, a person to be disinfected or decontaminated, require a person to be vaccinated, that's a duplication there, that the person provide information or answer questions about the person's health or other circumstances, that the person's health be monitored and the results reported, that the person attend training or advice sessions on how to reduce the risk of infecting or contaminating others, that the person be subject to restrictions as to where the person may go or with whom the person has contact, that the person abstain from working or trading. And as I say, a whole host of others about places and about organisations as well. And then at the end of that section, it asks a question. This is question 28. Do you agree or disagree with the proposed restrictions and requirements that may be included in health protection regulations? Please give reasons for your answer. So that is just one aspect of this particular document. And this is the policy proposals consultation page itself. They say that the overarching principle of the draft bill is to protect the population against various forms of infection and contamination, including biological, chemical and radiological, in addition to infectious diseases, which is the focus of the earlier act, the 1967 Act on this. The all hazards approach will enable broader surveillance, support and more timely and effective intervention, controlling the spreading of infection and contamination generally, and if needs be, in an emergency. Now, of course, the emergency legislation which was imposed during the COVID period itself contains very similar restrictions, but that was temporary legislation, emergency legislation put in place for a restricted period of time. And it is true that in Northern Ireland that was longer than for the rest of the UK. But nonetheless, what this seems to be doing is putting this in place at a time when there is no public health emergency, and therefore this is not emergency legislation. It enables emergency restrictions without having to put through any kind of emergency legislation at the time, and it's being consulted on. So we would urge people to get involved in that consultation. Debi, very briefly, what are your thoughts on this?
Well, my thoughts, good afternoon, everybody. My thoughts are that the COVID emergency restrictions, which were meant to be temporary, are now obviously going to be translated into permanence. And of course, Brian was mentioning New Zealand as well. We need to keep an eye on New Zealand, but we look at a permanence of emergency regulations where they can do what they want when they want.
Yes, well, thank you for that. So let's move on to health in general. And so what have you got for us?
Right. Well, yeah, let's look at the NHS because we're in a bit of a mess, aren't we? So, NHS networks have brought out this article, Internationally Educated Nursing Staff. So, they're saying that many migrant nursing staff, two-thirds actually, a huge proportion, are thinking of leaving the UK due to cost of living pressures, and they don't have any recourse to public funds. So, they have to rely on temporary visas and pay tax, but they don't get any indefinite leave to remain. And that's what's important here. So when I went to look at the Royal College of Nurses, the RCN also have said to scrap unfair benefit rules because migrant nursing staff, they're saying they're calling it a mass exodus. And then as we go further on into the report, it highlights this indefinite leave to remain because somebody in the health profession, and of course, Professor Diane Rasmussen McCaddy's mentioned this before as well. If you are in this country, you have to apply for leave to stay, and this is costing £2,885. And we've got 40,000 vacancies in the NHS at the moment, but apparently 1 in 5 on the register are educated outside of the UK. But if anybody wants to read the report, there was a little thumbnail of the report on that slide without a safety net. But let's look at some risks coming forward because we've got more risks, mpox, you name it. But who's heard of sloth fever? So sloth fever, apparently, it doesn't involve sloths. Apparently sloths can get it, but it comes from mosquitoes and originates from Cuba. But apparently it's heading for Europe and the USA. If you go to the next slide, it tells you quite clearly that this is a mysterious threat. The Lancet call it a mysterious threat. But what's a little bit more concerning is they're saying it's an emerging disease which particularly affects pregnant women. And the symptoms, you might actually find these quite familiar: fever, headache, muscle aches, stiff joints, nausea, vomiting, chills, sensitivity to light, and also just note meningitis and encephalitis. You'll see why in a minute. But the fears are that it could be potentially very dangerous to babies, birth defects, stillbirths, etc. So that's another one to be looking out for. And then, of course, the government are urging students to protect themselves from meningitis. They want them all to go and get jabbed for meningitis, measles, and HPV. So that's for students. And then we can go to antibiotic resistance. I'm just going to go through a few little stories that I think you should be keeping an eye on. So antibiotic resistance in gonorrhea cases are on the rise. In 2023, there were 85,000 gonorrhea diagnosis. That's the highest since records began in 1918. I wonder why that could be happening. But let's go back to school because, of course, we're off back to school today. Many kids going back, including my grandson, first day at school. And the UKHSA are warning of back to school measles surge, where you get a first dose offered at 1 year and a second dose at 3 years, 4 months. Please, it says, urgent call to parents. And in the next slide, you'll see that again, they're going for parents. Please, parents, go and get your children vaccinated. Not only the UKHSA, but also the NHS. The NHS are putting out an ad promo, which has got kids on it, actually. And I think we have shown this promo video before, but here's a slide shot just to show you if we're not vaccinated, we're not protected. So that's the messaging for children. And of course, we're coming up to, it's a whole vaccination scheme now, isn't it? Coming up to autumn. And now we've got the new RSV vaccine. And it says here, RSV usually gets better by itself, which it does. But they are still promoting and pushing a vaccine. So who gets it? Pregnant mums, of course, 28 weeks onwards. But if you're over 80, you don't get it. So you're not deemed vulnerable enough at 80 to get it. But the vaccine drive is on full pelt now. And what concerned me was this put out by the UKHSA, which are calling it a marketing campaign. Now, doesn't that just say it all? A marketing campaign launches to drive up childhood vaccinations. They're really going for the kids. So let's have a look at the NHS vaccinations, especially for children. And by my reckoning, babies under a year are due to have 8 jabs from 8 weeks to 16 weeks. That's 8 jabs in 8 weeks. And some of those are the 6-in-1, which is called a hexavalent. Let's not forget hex means a curse, but they're called 6-in-1 hexavalent with diphtheria, Hep B, Hib, polio, tetanus, and whooping cough combo. So they get all of those. And at 1 year, they get a further 4 jabs. So by the time they're 1 year old, they've had 12. So please keep an eye on your child's immunisation programme and what you're being expected to give to your child. Staying on vaccines, many of you might remember this interview that we did with Peter Todd, consultant solicitor, and Alex Kelly. They were both talking about vaccine injuries and the vaccine damage payments. And Alex set up a COVID vaccine injured and bereaved legal fund, which you'll see on the next slide. And please do go and have a look at that. And if you are able to donate, they would be incredibly grateful. And that's Peter Todd, the solicitor. Now, he's just put out an announcement. And thank you to Alex for sending me this. I'll leave it for you to freeze the screen and read, but basically there have been 14,000 claims, 6,134. The initial decision have had an initial decision, but there's been less than 50% success rate. 97% have been initially declined. 358 claims had the causation accepted. However, no award was made due to the disablement being considered insufficiently severe. 65 awards where the applicant had died. At 1,012 requests on reversal of consideration have been filed. And in summary, really, Peter Todd says this scheme is completely unfair, huge unfairness, and a total lack of justice. So that's where we are. With regards to vaccine injuries. But let's stay on vaccines because Pfizer are still very much in the news and they are pushing stuff down the pipeline. But they're in trouble. Well, they've been in trouble many times before, but here we've got, they're being sued by Texas over misleading marketing. So they're calling for deceptive marketing, saying that there was no 95% efficacy based on the 2 months clinical trial data. And it's not just Texas, it's Kansas as well. Only Kansas are suing Pfizer with regards to their vaccine and myocarditis. So this is really important, a really, really interesting case, and please one to keep an eye out. But despite that, despite all of that and the damage that we know that these injections have done, and the book of risks that I have, the Pfizer analysis documents, which many of you have as well, we still have got approval. So the FDA have just approved Moderna and Pfizer's BioNTech's, their updated COVID-19 vaccine. So they're still rolling it out. And they're also rolling out the propaganda. So Pfizer is actually coming to school. You don't have to go to Pfizer anymore. Pfizer's coming to school. And this is the video that they've just released on school.
The future of science requires us to be more creative.
Pfizer School of Science mobile experience is a fantastic, interactive, escape room-like experience for school students to come through and get excited about science, technology, engineering, mathematics. And this experience really brings out their inner scientists and helps solve a mystery along with our Pfizer colleagues.
Go ahead and get your lab coat. This right here, and basically play. They're having fun with it. What is our breaking news right now?
People are showing up at doctor's offices with green
lizard skin.
They can leave their classrooms with their teachers, that come to this great environment, and they get to actually experience the science through the work they do, the problem solving, the team building, versus through a lecture.
The tasks that they have to complete for each room, they're actually learning different skills.
Critical.
So Pfizer's coming to school, and if you stay tuned for Extra, I'm going to be showing you some magic moments from Pfizer as well, and also their One for All app. So come back to us for Extra and you'll see why I'm so concerned about apps in general. Over to you, Mike.
Thanks, Debbie. Thanks. And Mark, let's welcome you to the programme. We've been talking about birth rates in recent weeks, but you have an update on that for us.
Hello, good morning from Texas, a very early morning. Yes, in the fairly recent past, I've talked about Japan, the government there being quite nervous and quite scared about the future for their aging population and nothing to replace them with. And they're not the only country. Italy has also seen small villages virtually disappear from the lack of birth rate. At any rate, Stephen Mosier with the Population Research Institute recently wrote for lifenews.com this article, the headline being, the world is running out of children as global birth rates collapse. And the implications are far-reaching. Social security systems that need more young workers to pay into the system could very well collapse as well. This is particularly prevalent in the United States, but also elsewhere. Now, some of what Mosier had to say is as follows. The collapse in birth rates that began in post-war Europe has, in the decades since, spread to every single corner of the globe, he says. Many nations are already feeling what he calls a death spiral, filling more coffins than cradles each year, a rather jolting consideration. Just this past year, Mosier writes, Japan lost nearly 1 million people, Poland lost 130,000. However, the big story comes from China, home to 1/6 of the world's population. China finally admitted that its population was in fact shrinking, but demographers, including Mosier himself, believe that the numbers have actually been falling for almost a decade. I'll briefly note that Mosier is formerly an atheist pro-choice guy, and when he went to China himself and saw their policies and actions, he converted to Christianity, he says. The average Indian woman, Mosier goes on to say, has been having only 2 children over her reproductive lifetime, the Indian government reported in 2021, well below the 2.25 or so needed to sustain the current population, Mosier went on to say. And there's a little bit more to share. The same story is being repeated all over the world as birth rates in Latin America, Middle East, and even Africa are reportedly collapsing. The current total fertility of Tunisian women, for example, is estimated at 1.93. That's 1.93. The result of all these empty wombs is that humanity just passed a major milestone, but not necessarily one to celebrate. And in Mosier's estimation, he goes on to say, for the first time in the 60,000 or so years that human beings first arrived on the planet, and of course there are different theories of the age of the earth and all that, we are not having enough babies to replace ourselves. And he goes on to say, because of ever lengthening lifespans, the population will continue to grow until mid-century. But when this demographic momentum ends, and it will end, we'll reach a second grim milestone on humanity's downward trajectory. So this is a very strong consideration to take into account. And to summarize, Mosier, president of the Population Research Institute, a nonprofit in the United States, that organization has pledged to, among other things, debunk the overpopulation myth, which cheapens human life, expose the relentless promotion of abortion, abortifacient contraception, and chemical and surgical sterilization in what he calls misleadingly labeled population stabilization, family planning, and reproductive health programs. Kamala Harris goes on to say reproductive rights. Defund these programs by exposing coercion, deception, and racism inherent in them, emphasize that people are the most valuable resource on the planet, and promote pro-natal and pro-family attitudes, laws, and policies worldwide. So that, Mike, is a summation of what Mr. Mosier has to say. And the worldwide implications, again, are very, very wide-ranging and have a lot of impact. Social support systems like Social Security, healthcare systems that depend on young workers coming up, and myriad other things are at stake here. So when people talk about Social Security, funding Social Security, for example, in the United States, this is a perspective that needs to be kept on the table. And it's something you don't often hear about. And we'll talk about it more in the not too distant future to see what some of these individual nations might be doing about it. But I think that's good for now, Mike, at this point. So back to you.
And Mark, I mean, we have this problem in every Western country in particular that's particularly stark here with aging populations, and at the same time we're seeing material being increasingly published in the press about how in the not too distant future it's going to be seen as a sort of an act that is going to be necessary for people to consider ending their lives early. This is massive pressure that aging populations are putting on, as you say, health systems and social care systems, and no younger workforce to pay for these things. This doesn't begin to look good for anybody that's maybe 50 or younger.
Yeah, I'll only add that you make a good point there, Mike. It's not just the birth rate and issues like abortion, issues like people simply not wanting to have children. It's not just the abortion industry. And people that are migrants and are always on the move, and having a family just doesn't work out. It's also at the other end of life, the elderly. So yeah, major impacts, health systems, social security systems, pension systems, you name it. So
yeah,
a lot
okay.
to think about.
Indeed. Thank you, Mark. Okay, if you like what the UK Column does, you would like to support us, the place to go is support.ukcolumn.org. There are various options to help us out there. We do need your help and your financial support. It's what keeps us going. And we, again, thank you to everybody that is helping us with that. But have a look at that and see if you can help. Otherwise, find something from ukcolumn.org and ukcolumnextracts.co.uk and promote it, because we are censored and we do need you to be the algorithm. Now, Debbie talking about vaccines again today. We've been playing with YouTube recently, again, to see just what the limitations are on YouTube. If it wasn't for the fact that Wednesday's program had already been caused a strike, and we therefore are not allowed to live stream on YouTube again for another 2 weeks, today's program definitely would have done it. So Debbie, well done there. We'll keep people posted on this situation in the coming days and weeks. You can help by picking something up at the UK Column shop. That would be very helpful as well. There's plenty to have a look at there, and more items coming. But if you haven't got to pick a copy of Your Life in Their Hands, please do grab one. And for all the people overseas that are dying to get a copy of this, we have found a solution to this. And so from, I believe, the 1st of November, the shop will be going international once again. And everybody overseas will be able to pick something up from there. So we will keep you posted on that. Charles' interview with Claire Wills-Harrison, otherwise known as Lures for Light on Telegram, is up on the UK Column website. If you haven't seen this, it is fantastic. Have a look at that. Brian is premiering another episode of Walking the Dog on YouTube, and his YouTube channel at 11 a.m. Because this is relatively uncontroversial, I believe he still is able to premiere on YouTube on his channel. Although I do believe he's had one strike so far on there, but we'll keep you posted on that too. But keep an eye out for that on Sunday morning, and then on Sunday evening, we are hosting live streaming for International Centre for 9/11 Justice, a symposium called Aviation Impossibilities: Deconstructing the Official Story of the 9/11 Hijackings and Air Defence Failures. Ted Walter, Olivier Caron-Masson, Aidan Monaghan and Kevin Ryan speaking at that. It'll be hosted by Piers Robinson. So join us for that, 6 p.m. UK time on Sunday. Don't forget, 19th of October, the UK Column on Location conference taking place in Bristol. Tickets still available for that. Join us for that if you possibly can. And Brian and I will be speaking at the Heritage Party conference on the 28th of September in Reading. And if anybody's interested in that, the details at heritageparty.org. So where does that take us then? It takes us to prisons. And this amazing article, I've chosen Sky News, but it was all over the mainstream press this morning. Offenders could serve sentence in Estonian prisons to ease overcrowding. So the Labour regime in this country talking about sending prisoners overseas because the prison system here completely overcrowded. Sky News here saying the government is not ruling out sending offenders to Estonia as a means of alleviating severe overcrowding in UK prison estate. Sky News understands that having offenders serve out their sentence in the Baltic state is one of the many options being considered to address overcrowding on the prison estate. And the latest government figures showing there are only 1,098 free spaces in prisons across England and Wales. So here is Labour's Boris Johnson, Angela Eagle, saying the new Labour government has inherited an absolute crisis in our prison system with very few places remaining there. I think that colleagues in the Ministry of Justice will be considering anything that they can to alleviate the problem. What we cannot have is people who are convicted of perhaps violent or serious crimes not being able to be in jail. So that's what Angela Eagle had to say. She's, of course, is the Home Office Minister. I should say Dame Angela Eagle, perhaps. But I just want to remind you of this piece of legislation from the previous regime. This is the Tory government's criminal justice bill. And this was from 2023. It didn't go through. in time before the general election. But let's just highlight a couple of aspects of this. First of all, they were determined that they were going to make sentences longer for the most dangerous criminals, including by making rapists serve every day of their sentence behind bars. Well, as we know, at the moment, the UK government is busy emptying the prisons in order to make room for those nasty far-righters that are complaining about immigration and so on social media and whatnot. But the Times here carrying an article headlined, "Risky Offenders Will Go Free," when warns prisons. Watchdog, almost 2,000 inmates will be released next week amid concerns about housing and possibility of reoffending. So he's talking about risky offenders. That doesn't seem to fit with the policy expressed in that previous legislation. But let's bring that back on screen, because the other part that I want to highlight was that legislation was designed to, amongst other things, establish powers to transfer prisoners in and out of England and Wales to serve their sentences abroad. In other words, the UK has no such power at this point in time. And so without legislation, it becomes very unclear how the UK regime could export prisoners to Estonia until legislation goes through. So I'm going to suggest that the coverage of that in the mainstream media is a bit of fake news at this stage, in the sense that it is designed to encourage a response from the public. They are pushing those headlines out in the mainstream press to see what kind of response they see across social media and so on. And they will then decide whether to include that in any upcoming legislation that they have on this. But in the meantime, more people being sentenced every week as a result of the recent so-called violent protest and the beginning of the release of prisoners in order to make space for those. Mark, let's bring you back on screen then, and we're talking about foreign policy and a recent conference in the States.
Yes, on September 4, Mike, I covered a speech by Walter Russell Mead through the American Enterprise Institute and covered it virtually. And Walter Russell Mead is among the more noted foreign policy commentators, considered something of a guru in foreign policy circles. So I decided to cover it, much like covering CFR or Chicago Council on Global Affairs, pretty much the same ideology. The American Dream Lecture Series, Walter Russell Mead on American Foreign Policy in the Next Presidency. He had some interesting things to say. I'll do a slight rebuttal at the end. But anyway, this is some of what it was about. He kind of steered it a different way, but this is some of it. As we approach the 2024 presidential election, foreign policy concerns loom large. China continues to strengthen its military and challenge American influence around the globe. A regional war threatens to break out in the Middle East. Russia shows no sign of relenting in its invasion of Ukraine. How would a returning President Trump or ascendant President Kamala Harris confront these threats? Should we expect major foreign policy changes from either of the major parties? Obviously, they're into the duopoly. There's no other possibilities for president. And what impending crises are on the horizon? And from there, we'll just keep going. This is all my writing, and I took all these photos through the screenshot option. There's Walter Russell Mead. He's with the Hudson Institute, which is Bilderberg connected. A widely cited analyst, Walter Russell Mead is a foreign affairs professor at Bard College, formerly taught foreign policy at Yale, writes for the Wall Street Journal, also contributes to the CFR Journal Foreign Affairs, and he's a former Henry Kissinger Senior Fellow at the CFR, a former. And moving on, this is my own writing, not taken from any press release. By the way, he's also co-founder of the New America Foundation, and that includes some Bilderberg luminaries like Reid Hoffman and Anne Marie Slaughter. A quick footnote there, but the main planks that Walter Russell Mead had to say are as follows. America, he says, has been presiding over a Pax Americana, not the so-called rules-based order. He kind of chafed at that. He doesn't really believe a rules-based order is even the right way to describe it. He believes it's been a Pax Americana all along, which you don't hear real often, meaning he feels that the world arrangement over the decades since World War II has not been based on these rules so much as it's been based on American power. and this Pax Americana, he says, is in a state of steep decline. The U.S., he went on to say, was once alone as a world power. Other nations would abstain from challenging U.S. predominance, but now America's unipolar moment is over, quote unquote. And the year 2024, he went on to say, is nothing like the good old days of 1990. Why did we fail? He's asking. Did President Clinton make trade and economic errors? Did George W. Bush make the wrong 9/11 decisions? Was Obama too weak in Syria? Was Trump too brash? He asked all these questions. Why did we fail? And going on from there, he went on to say, Team Harris seems generally oriented toward restoring and saving the Pax Americana, but may fail to act. Team Trump is not so sure that the Pax Americana was a good idea in the first place. Whoever becomes president will face the rise of China in the Indo-Pacific, and China's potential actions could seriously challenge a return to a Pax Americana. So he believes it's something virtually lost that we should return to. Meade feels that much centers on Taiwan. He says Japan and South Korea would likely cozy up to China and shy away from the U.S. if China gets into a conflict with the U.S. over the control of Taiwan, thereby weakening the U.S. position. Historically, the U.S. sought to prevent Britain, Russia, and Japan from becoming dominant powers, but now it's China to deal with, and concerns also extend to challenges from Russia, challenges from Iran, and possibly even North Korea in a sort of subordinate way or a lesser way. And some of the main quotes, the takeaways from Mr. Meade, this is one of them. Geopolitical competition is driving a wave of conflict and wars. So he is pushing the fear button a bit, but he believes it's logically grounded. He went on to say, quote, China understands the stakes and what the seizure of Taiwan would mean. And Mr. Meade went on to say that goods from that region, great region's nations, that the greater region's nations may stop flowing in the event of a U.S. conflict with China over Taiwan. Interesting stuff. And getting into a little bit more of the meat of what he had to say. And what I wrote here, Mike, is only a main slice or the main stuff. There's a lot more I could have put down, but I wanted to keep it well focused. Mr. Meade went on to say, talking about Iran in pretty bleak terms, Iran was cited as a major ongoing threat, even equal to or beyond any threat posed by China or Russia, at least at this time. Iran, as an unrelenting foe of Israel, is seeking to become a dominant regional power. Meanwhile, Israel's other enemies, such as Hezbollah, also won't relent. He called Iran the runt of the litter and says he claims it's dominating Syria, Iraq, and Lebanon. The next U.S. president will likely face a nuclear Iran, he predicted. Yet the core supporters of both Harris and Trump are inward looking, which is code speak among globalists who are worried about domestic populations becoming more focused on their own countries and becoming more isolationist, one of the dreaded words among globalists. Anyway, meanwhile, both Obama regarding Crimea and George W. Bush regarding the Russian invasion of Georgia, in Meade's opinion, they both appeased and excused Russian aggressions. In the present time, Americans will grow wary of supporting Ukraine, and that would perhaps further strengthen Russia even more. Forgive the slight misspelling of strengthening there. And to summarize, Mr. Meade made some, pretty blanket statements, really engaging the audience. He said, the American unipolar moment is over, and there's no agreed upon consensus on what should replace it. And I believe from there, in the time allotted, we've got a little bit from the Hudson Institute itself. This is by Arthur Herman, Toward a New Pax Americana. And what I found, and the subtitle is A New Arsenal of Democracy is Needed to Secure American Power in the 21st Century. What I found, Mike, is despite the rather insightful, although we may not agree with him totally, but the rather insightful comments of Mr. Walter Russell Meade, what I found was that a lot of it came kind of out of the boilerplate writings of the Hudson Institute itself. It wasn't really as in terms of his presentation, it wasn't really so much his unique statements, although there were some, but again, kind of Hudson Institute boilerplate. And this shows that. This notes that the Pax Americana that has prevailed over world affairs since the end of World War II, they're claiming, is dead, not just ailing, but dead. If not actually buried, it must now be replaced. The two remaining questions are with what and how. And this is where it gets interesting, and this is where I have a slight rebuttal. The term Pax Americana, American peace, refers to the international order of the U.S. constructed after World War II and the decades of relative peace and prosperity that followed under U.S. economic and military leadership of the free world, quote unquote. That's a challengeable concept there, notwithstanding the context of a Cold War with the threat of the Soviet Union. And since 1948, that order has proved remarkably resilient and flexible in the face of multiple challenges. These included rapid changes in America's own economic fortunes and the periodic commitment of America's formidable military to large-scale wars in Asia, including Korea and Vietnam, and the Middle East, Desert Storm, Iraq, and Afghanistan. Afghanistan being the longest war that America was ever involved in, about 20 years, not to mention the collapse of that order's principal antagonist, the USSR, and the rise of its latest antagonist, the People's Republic of China. And my brief rebuttal on this, Mike, or observation, is that Pax Americana, meaning American peace, since about 1948, really never happened. America's been the global cop. Now it's the country on which the sun never sets in terms of its military assets and its reach. And it actually has fostered, again, the longest war on record, Afghanistan, a massive killing in Iraq starting in March of 2003 with the shock and awe bombing, unprecedented, lengthy wars with no real objectives like in Desert Storm. And really all it is war and violence on another footing. Yes, there haven't been any declared wars by the U.S. since World War II, but the undeclared wars and the global policing is simply another kind of warfare system. So to say American peace, Pax Americana, I think it's questionable as to whether that really ever happened. So it throws into question the whole premise of citing the death of this Pax Americana and what they're going to replace it with. So I'll do some follow-ups on this to see exactly what the globalists are thinking in terms of their premises and in terms of what they would replace it with. And is it true that this is really dead? I think that's what it boils down to, is the premises they use and the conclusions they make, and are they really true? But still, this gives some insight into the current thinking in foreign policy circles. So back to you, Mike.
Yeah, I mean, Mark, I'm just going to throw this back at you a little bit because as far as I can see, what he's saying is he's asking the question, what's going to replace Pax Americana? He doesn't have any answers about that, but he's busy making sure that everybody's focused on the more recent enemies like Iran and China. So in other words, their only answer so far is to have more of the same of this kind of undeclared war through proxies and perpetual warfare that we've got through this absolute hybrid operation we have against Russia, China, and Iran at the moment.
Exactly. Perpetual war for perpetual peace, which is a phrase coined when the Carnegie Endowment was investigated for actually fostering war. So, yeah, it's going to be more perpetual war for perpetual peace as far as we can tell, unless we hear otherwise.
Yes. Well, thanks, Mark. So let's just very briefly look at Ukraine. And this is going to be very brief because I just wanted to highlight one particular incident recently. So this is the BBC saying that Ukraine says soldiers among 51 killed in Poltava missile attack. So this was a hypersonic missile, hit this building. Basically, it came in so quickly that they literally only got the air raid siren up a few seconds before it hit. Various discussion of how many people have been killed by this. 51 mentioned in the BBC article here, but other sources suggesting as many as 600 people killed in this incident. But most importantly, suggestions that Swedish personnel have been involved in this. So let's bring the fact checkers on screen, because of course we need to know whether it's true or not. And this is logically facts. And they claim that Russian news lets news outlets have been falsely claiming Swedish military instructors were killed in the Poltava military strike. So the fact checkers have been out straight away to make sure that we understand that this claim that Swedish have been involved is false. The problem is that almost immediately after this, the Swedish foreign minister has resigned, and he's not saying why he's resigned. So this is Sweden's top diplomat, Billström, who led NATO talks. So he led the talks to bring Sweden into NATO in recent months, has resigned. And as I say, nobody's saying why. The fact checkers, again, absolutely denying or claiming to know that despite there's been no public statement about why he's resigned, they're claiming to know that he did not resign because of any Swedish personnel involved in this Poltava strike. So this is a developing story, and we'll keep an eye on it. But it looks like foreign instructors, let's say, have been involved and have died as a result. We'll keep you posted. Debbie, let's move on now. And what's back to the UK and the issue of net zero and driving?
Yes, well, I think I've worked out to 54 days now to the budget, so not long to wait. And it's interesting, actually, because the government pushing out more to see the social media reaction again. So 2030, petrol, diesel cars will go. And thank you so much to @Nick Walker72, Mixmaster Mirage, who did this graphic for me and has done lots of graphics that, especially if you come back for extra, you'll see another lovely graphic. Thank you so much to him for this graphic. Because do you remember, he also reminded me, do you remember back in lockup, Cheshire Constabulary and Wiltshire Police, I've just got two examples really of screenshots to tell you that you weren't allowed to drive. Do you remember in lockup? You couldn't travel to exercise. You couldn't take your car out anywhere. Was this one big nudge for what we've got coming up? Because I just want to give you a little bit of very brief history. Back in 2007, there was a road price petition. Now, the pay-as-you-drive road tolls debate really hotted up then, but a huge 1.7 million rejected the plan to charge drivers £1.34 a mile at peak time. Motorists feel really strongly, and they did mention actually that Blair had been caught off guard at the fuel price protests in 2000, which actually brought Britain to a standstill. So is this a shot across the bows? They know that drivers are going to react. Or are they trying to engineer more outrage, more upset for more protests? That I don't know. But if we leap forward to 2019, the RAC were reminding everybody of this outrage and the fact that the public didn't want it. However, in October 2019, MPs didn't seem to have listened, and the RAC said, no, they need to listen to more. We want a national road pricing debate. So the Transport Committee, again in October 2019, decided to kickstart the conversation again for pay per mile. And here we are today in September, in the Telegraph is now reporting that Rachel Reeves is about to hit petrol car drivers with a pay per mile tax. And even the RAC are actually pushing for this. But interestingly, the Express just came out with an article to say that actually many are going to ditch their petrol cars and stop driving completely. And isn't that the aim we're thinking moving forward? In fact, they're predicting a huge 38%, would you believe, are going to ditch their cars. And I just have to say the caveat 15-minute cities, does that ring any bells? So I went to Cinch to see what pay per mile would actually mean. And basically, because electric cars at the moment don't pay any tax or very little, we seem to have taken, or the government say they seem to have taken a hit. So in order to make up the difference and to replace vehicle excise duty, petrol car drivers will have to pay a tax on annual mileage. What could possibly go wrong? But on the next shot, I just want to show you a picture of a camera, because cameras are very important in this. They're going to be using number plate recognition, just like Sadiq Khan uses for ULEZ. So is he thinking about rolling this out in London, perhaps where the infrastructure is? Because we're seeing cameras popping up all over the place, and we'll talk about those in a minute. But I went to fact check, as you do, to see, is Sadiq Khan playing about with this idea? And apparently, no, he's not. He's not thinking about pay per mile. But they put a very interesting caveat in the next slide, which said that fact check can't fact check the future. So basically, anything's on the table, I would say. So let's go and look at the government's end of sale of petrol diesel cars in 2030, because they've taken this historic step, and apparently they've done it through a consultation. And the consultation outcome in the next slide will say that petrol and diesel cars, now it's been brought forward to a ban to 2030, and all new cars and vans will have to be fully zero emission at the tailpipe by 2035. And they include some hybrids, which is interesting. And for that, I'll show you why. But let's just look at EVs, because we've done loads of work on EVs on the column. And the BBC are reporting, is the move to electric cars running out of power? Well, I would say it probably is. And why? Well, the BBC say that it's because we need to buy loads more. In order to hit the climate target, we need 800 million by 2035. And at the moment, we've only got 50 million. So we're well short. And people aren't sure that they're worth it. They don't like electric cars. They say it's a high cost. And most of the electric cars that you see on the roads at the moment are company cars. They're fleet cars who have been given generous tax breaks. And you can see there that even in 2024, Tesla sales are going down. But the cost of an average EV in the USA is $60,000. So they're very highly priced. But what are manufacturers saying? Well, Volvo apparently has turned around and said, no, they're not going to do it. They are going to carry on selling hybrids. So they're not going to get rid of petrol cars completely. They're going to have hybrids. This is going to be interesting to see where this fits in with legislation. But why is electric vehicle apathy forcing car makers to take desperate measures? And they are taking desperate measures. And further on in the article, it says that many distributors actually are going to be closing, and motorists are being put off because of the price. But the parity between second-hand market now is starting to narrow. So you can actually get a second-hand EV for the same price as a petrol. But I have to say that if you get a second-hand EV, which is probably 5 years old, that battery is going to be 5 years old, and we'll come on to batteries in a minute. So why have we been looking at EVs for so long? Well, obviously we've been looking at EV fires, haven't we? We've been looking at a huge amount of fires. This is a CE Safety published this in 2022, but it was over the last 5 years, going back to 2017, and they were saying that they're very dangerous, difficult to extinguish the fires, and they've caused serious damage. And we know that already because of previous articles that we've covered on the column. But so far, London, 93 vehicles, they were reporting 78 injuries. It goes on and on forever. If we go on to the next slide too, it talks about huge amounts of call-outs, the London fires caused by electric batteries. And you can see there that the graph screenshot is 43.7% are cars. But surprisingly, I didn't realise mobility scooters are included in this as well. So 3.1% of fires are happening with mobility scooters. When we look at the RAC are talking about batteries, which we know, of course, are the lithium batteries. And they talk further on in the article about the cost of them and how often they need charging. So they say they last 10 to 20 years on average, although I have known people say that they last a lot less. It's £8,000 for a new Tesla battery, although they say those prices are coming down. And not all manufacturers specify a state of health replacement before you're eligible for a replacement. So if you are thinking of buying an electric car, which I'm sure none of you are, you need to check these kind of things. But you know what? Where to go but Jeff Buys Cars. And if you're listening, Jeff Buys Cars, amazing videos you put out. And you've been highlighting that there's been cameras popping up all over the place. I'm sure you've seen them. Wherever you're living. But he's done a lot of videos on cameras and a lot of videos on cars. And this is a little bit of what he had to say about pay per mile.
A government announcement is expected in due course, all right? I was banging on about pay per mile and road user charging 18 months ago. The goal is for them to put the cameras up so that they can switch you off. When they introduce the 15-minute cities, when they introduce all of these neighbourhoods that you're not allowed to leave, if they've got the pay per mile cameras up and active, and if the system is running, it's going to be a lot easier for them to lock you in your house and to prevent you from going anywhere. That's what all of this is about. It's got nothing to do with a black hole in the budget, because they created the black hole in the budget, and anyone with a brain could have predicted that the black hole in the budget was going to happen. So don't incentivize business users into buying electric cars and then pretend that you didn't realize that those business users were then not going to be paying for their fuel and you were going to lose out on the money. They knew all along. They are lying to us time and time again. Understand where these agendas come from. Understand what the end goal is. It's got nothing to do with money and everything to do with you losing your freedom. Miss the camera.
I feel like that too. Thank you so much, Jeff. I thought that was brilliant. But you know what? I picked up Jacob Rees-Mogg talking about his hybrid on GB News. And this is a very short clip of what happened to Jacob Rees-Mogg. Listen carefully. What happened to his hybrid?
Well, now we've got billions of miles of data, global data, that shows that these batteries are not degrading as we've been told. So I drove a Tesla the other day, a 2018 car with 250,000 miles on it, and it was as fresh as paint, and the battery was just doing really, really well. So there is no data to say anywhere that batteries are failing prematurely or causing issues. Your Lexus, obviously,
the battery blew up and it wouldn't move an inch.
I can only apologise.
It's not your personal fault. But you see, I don't disagree particularly with anything you're saying. I'm just thinking the market should decide. And if people want to buy petrol cars, should be allowed to do so.
So his battery blew up. Do I need to say more? Back to you, Mike.
Thank you, Debbie. Okay, let's move on to the issue of censorship and misinformation. Well, a bit of news from the United States here. 2 RT employees indicted for covertly funding and directing US company that published thousands of videos in furtherance of Russian issues. So says the Office of Public Affairs. The Office of Public Affairs at the U.S. Department of Justice. So employees of Russian state-controlled media outlet deployed nearly $10 million to publish RT-curated content, which garnered millions of views through a Tennessee-based online content creation company, is what they're saying. This was covered in The Guardian, which is now apparently News Provider of the Year. I thought The Telegraph was claiming the same thing. But anyway, they have said, their headline here is US conservative influencers say they are victims of Russian disinformation campaigns. Tim Pool, Dave Rubin and Benny Johnson addressed allegations that a company they were associated with had been paid to publish videos with messages in favour of Russia. Now, this is all a bit silly. It's silly that RT has done this in a sense, because they have undoubtedly been pushing money in the direction of so-called influencers online. And of course, that leaves everybody concerned open to allegations of pushing Russian disinformation and pushing Russian narratives, even when in fact the Russian narratives may be true, but that's never mind the factual aspect of this. The allegations there, but the point that I really wanted to make here and remind everybody of course, is that while we are told that we need this censorship regime because of Russian disinformation appearing in the Western media, or in the Western alternative media rather, and so on, the West and Britain have been doing this for years. Everybody does this. There's nothing unusual about it in any way, no matter how it is being pushed by the people that want to push this censorship regime. So let's just remind ourselves about Juliet Harkin, formerly of BBC Media Action, talking about how they were doing exactly this in Syria in 2004. So 7 years before the outbreak of the civil war, we, BBC Media Action, worked in 2004 with individuals within the Syrian ministry who wanted change and tried to get them to be drivers of that. But they were also, of course, training journalists in these countries, in many countries around the world, to push Western narratives into those countries. And this is something that we've been highlighting for many years. Have a look at this article entitled Abusing the System Through NGOs and CSOs, so non-governmental organizations and civil society organizations, increasingly being banned in countries like Russia and other countries for bringing Western ideas and Western narratives into those countries. Now, Marietta Abel's article here actually talking about their activities domestically, but we have other content on the UK column talking about how these organizations are pushing foreign policy into other countries. So to suggest that Russia is somehow doing something different or unusual here is a bit silly. But that's what's driving the censorship regime. And just very briefly, Pavel Durov, of course, arrested recently, the CEO of Telegram, has now published a statement on this, saying that he was interviewed by police for 4 days, a few days ago, last month. He was told he may be personally responsible for other people's illegal use of Telegram, and so on, and explaining how Telegram is cooperating with the EU and making a few points on this, the fact that the French authorities had numerous ways to reach him and so on. So you can read the full content of this on his Telegram channel. But it was this last point here that I really wanted to highlight. That's why he's made it his personal goal to ensure that Telegram significantly improves things in regard to the use of Telegram by criminals, as he's describing it. So I'm going to be very interested to see how the censorship and the moderation regime changes on Telegram, if it does, in the coming weeks and months. And then finally, just briefly follow up on what we were talking about on Wednesday with respect to digital ID, because one of the main digital ID providers in the UK is a company called Yoti, and they have made some recommendations for the forthcoming Digital Information and Smart Data Bill. And basically, they're saying the specific contents of the bill are still undisclosed, and so it's unknown at this stage if it will take a different approach to the previous Tory regime's attempt at this legislation, which also didn't pass before the general election. But they say that Yoti would like to see most of the provisions of the Data Protection and Digital Information Bill return. We are particularly supportive, they say, of the Digital Verification Service. And of course they are, because they are a provider of digital ID products. This is CFIT. This is the government-backed Centre for Finance, Innovation and Technology, and they've teamed up with leading banks in order to push digital ID verification in the UK. So they have teamed up with Amazon Web Services, A&O Sherman, Barclays, CRIF, Dun & Bradstreet, Ernst & Young, Experian, GLEIF, HSBC, LexisNexis, Lloyds Bank, MasterCard, Revolut, Santander, and Yoti, of course, taking part in this, because digital ID is needed in order to prevent scams online. So we permit the scams generating the problem, and then we provide the solution. But just a brief look around the world at this. Mauritius launches digital ID as part of a digital transformation strategy. We've got Brazil strengthening digital ID push. We've got Azerbaijan planning a rapid digital ID adoption. We've got Kenya digital ID rollout. We've got France with Hyperion acquisition. We've got India pushing digital ID. We've got Ethiopia pushing digital ID. It has happened, all those headlines just within the last few days or a week and a half or so. It is incredible how rapidly this particular agenda is developing. We'll obviously be covering it a lot more, but I think we need to be seeing a lot more pushback from general population on this. Debi, let's come back to you then for a final comment.
A final comment. Well, are you fed up with doing the housework? Do you need somebody to give you a hug? I want to introduce you to Neo Beta. This is the new humanoid robot prototype, and it's launching for home use. I know you're all ready with your order pads because you can't wait. A little bit more. Have I got another slide there with a little bit more information? Yes, there you go. 5'5", weighs 66 pounds. Interesting weight there, and it can lift double its weight. But you know what? Don't take my word for it. We've got a very short piece of video. And do you fancy having this in your home? I don't.
Yeah.
A robot hug with a difference. What more can I say, Mike?
Well, what more could you want? I don't know. I mean, that's spectacular. I placed my order straight away. Right, we got to leave it there for today. Thank you very much to everybody that's joined us. Thanks to Mark and Debbie. We'll be back in a few minutes for some extra. Join us for that if you're a UK Column member. And if you're not a UK Column member, maybe you'd like to become one. And then you can join us for all our future extra programs. See you soon. Bye-bye.